Hey there, it is Profit First Allocation Day. Every Monday, 15 minutes of my time is taken to go through my books and allocate money into my profit and tax accounts because profit is not an event, it's a habit, says Mike Michalowicz, the author of Profit First. Today, I'm going to be talking about profit margin. And before you just walk away or your eyes glaze over and you think, whoa, that's too much, I can't do it. Have you ever wished you could have one number that you could look at every week, every month, every quarter that would tell you if you're getting your prices right? If the answer to that is yes, it's something that I always wanted. And if you're answering yes as well, I'm going to tell you, you need to fall in love with your profit margin. That's a big statement, like falling in love with profit margin. When people used to say the word profit margin to me, I would glaze over, my eyes would cross. I would start yawning, maybe snoring, definitely looking off into the distance and thinking about, gosh, I wonder if I'm actually going to get squash from my squash plant. I can actually see that out my window, my squash plant, but I definitely avoided thinking and talking about profit margin because I thought I didn't understand it. And I thought I couldn't understand it. Let me rephrase that. I thought I couldn't understand profit margin because I'm not a numbers person. And that's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever told myself. You've probably told yourself some pretty ridiculous things before. I would love to hear about them in the comments below. Let's say our dumb things out loud that we've told ourselves. I have said that I can't understand profit margin, or I'm too busy to understand my profit margin, or profit margin is too complicated and I don't have time for that. I've said all of those silly things to myself. And the crazy part is, as a marketer, because I've been like, I'm too creative, I'm too strategic, I can't and don't want to talk about profit margin. The crazy part about that statement as a marketer is we are always working with numbers. So yes, we're creative. We do things like design and write copy and pull all of those pieces together and figure out who your audience is and come up with how they feel about things. Yeah, we're really in touch with the feelings and painting beautiful pictures of what success can look like. And the truth is that the entire time that we're doing that, we are looking at numbers. We're looking at traffic to your website. We're looking at which landing pages people are coming to more than others because we want to speak their language. We want to serve up content that's relevant to them. We're looking at click-throughs from social media posts to your website. We're looking at how many purchases. So what's your conversion rate? What's your lead rate? We are constantly working with numbers and we're constantly doing math. And sometimes we marketers, I am guilty, like to pretend that we're not numbers people. And the truth is we almost exclusively work with numbers. It's just out of that we tell stories. And I think that is the key here that helped me change my mindset around looking at a profit margin to help me figure out what is happening in my business. Christeen Era, my friend who wrote Profit First for Lawn Care and Landscape, has said, and I think I mentioned this last week around figuring out if your prices are too low, but she said your business is talking to you, it's telling you a story, it's doing it through the numbers. And we marketers are amazing at looking at data and telling a story. And so that's how I want you to think about your profit margin, because it is the number that will tell you if you're getting your pricing right or tell you if your company is sick and help you figure out, start making assessments as to what's wrong with it. So one of the things that I want to say about profit margin before we dive into numbers that are right is that pricing and profit margin can feel very emotional. And there are limiting beliefs, using psychological terms, that we say to ourselves. Like one of them for me, obviously, was I'm not a numbers person, which is completely false. There are stories that we're telling ourselves which are not true about the numbers piece and about our pricing. Like no one will pay this much for that thing that I'm doing. That is likely false. And they are stories that we tell ourselves, and we have a lot of baggage that we're bringing to the table that feed into our pricing and proposals, and being able to ask people for money and being able to follow up with people when they haven't paid. There's a lot of psychology going on there. That is not what this video is going to be about today. It is a good subject. We will address it at some point. That's not the topic for today. We're just specifically going to talk about the numbers and what that might be telling us. However, I can give you a good resource. Dr. Sabrina Starling of Tap the Potential, and you can find her at tapthepotential.com, has a podcast where she calls it Profit by Design. She helped me and continues to help me work through some of the emotional baggage that I have around pricing so that I don't let that bleed into my ability to price my services at the value that they deserve, at the value that I deserve. And also to sort of uncouple myself from this belief that the price I put on my product is telling me how valuable I am as a human being. That is something that I've dealt with and struggled with, and maybe you're struggling with it as well. That is a psychological piece, and we all need help with that in our business. And Dr. Sabrina Starling is fabulous at helping work through the psychology of sales and pricing and just running a business and working with people better. She's written the book, How to Hire the Best, and she's amazing. She can help with a lot of the psychological pieces. And I highly recommend that you follow her and even get coaching from her. That is how I worked through and have been working through some of these psychological pieces that I bring to the pricing table. But today, what I want to talk about is things that I've learned from my Profit First professionals, like Linda Stapp at Stapp Financial. She is my Profit First professional that I lean on her expertise to help me dig into the numbers. And she also holds me accountable to, hey, this is an emotional issue, barrier that you're putting up that is keeping you from charging the right prices for this product or service. So she helps that as well. However, just understanding what profit margin should be happening in my marketing business, I had to go to her. I had to use Christeen Era, Profit First for lawn care landscaping, both on a personal level and reading her book, and using my Profit First professional community helped me figure out the real numbers and where that needed to be for my marketing business in order for it to be healthy and ready to grow. So when we talk about profit margin, I guess the first question I had was, what does that mean? I have a business degree, and so I know how to calculate a profit margin. But in terms of Profit First and trying to figure out the right percentage for marketing, for a marketing business and what profit margin should look like in order to be a successful, healthy, and growing business, the number I had in my head was like 30%. I should have a 30% profit margin, and then my business will be healthy and growing. And that is not true. There's actually no way that I could operate this business, especially if we're talking about gross profit margin. There's no way I could operate a healthy business at 30%. Today. So maybe there are companies out there that can do that, but not this business. So I was aiming in the wrong direction. And if you're aiming in the wrong direction, you could be killing your business. And that's what I was doing. I was using a 30% markup, which is not even the same thing as a 30% profit margin, but I was aiming for a 30% markup to give me what I needed to make this business run. And it turns out for a gross profit margin, I actually need to hold the line at 70% or greater. So that is a sexy, sexy profit margin, according to Steve Bousquet, who is one of the instructors at Green Profit Academy. And he talks about creating a sexy profit margin. So this is the aspirational piece of getting your profit margins right that I think he's really great at explaining. When I said to my Profit First professionals and that community, I think a 30% profit margin is the right thing to do, they were like, no, that you can't survive on that. What you need to be aiming for is at least a 45% profit margin. And that can be a net profit margin where you're taking your revenue, you're removing all of your expenses, and what's left over is 45%. That's probably doable. When we're talking about gross profit margin, then what my company needs to aim for is 70%. So that means revenue comes in and 30% or less goes out to pay contractors, because we do have people contracted to do work with us. Those are 1099 contractors. Maybe they're technical help. Maybe they're writing for us. Maybe they're doing admin work even. That goes out the door and counts as a cost of goods sold. So if we look at the Profit First methodology, we're looking at revenue minus cost of goods sold equals real revenue. And that's where you start making your profit allocations. What we're trying to do is keep that number at 70% or higher. So 30% of that money that is coming in the door goes out the door to cover delivery of services. So what that looks like for me is 1099 contractors are included in that. We have technical experts that we pay as 1099 contractors, some graphic design people, some copywriters, some branding. Those are all 1099 contractors. And then we have software is usually what we're paying for as cost of goods sold. Once in a while, it'll be like a printing cost because someone needs a mailer or something. But because we're mostly focused on websites, it's typically software that we're buying for a particular website to complete a particular project. So if there's a website that needs a members only section and we have a plugin that costs $60 for that, where someone can log into a particular section and they are the only ones that can see content on the website, that's a cost of goods sold. So plugins that cost money per project for like a one website use would be a cost of goods sold. What I don't include in cost of goods sold are software that we use on every website or for every project. So enter things like SEMrush. That is a software that we use for looking at SEO traffic and analyzing that. And we do not include that in our cost of goods sold. So that is an operating expense that falls below our real revenue line. So everything that's particular to a project, technical pieces, delivery of content, design for a particular project, goes to cost of goods sold. And for each project, I don't want to spend more than 30% of the revenue coming in the door on those expenses. So now that I know that, and I know how to classify all of those pieces, there's a report that my Profit First professional put together for me in QuickBooks that delineates certain expenses as cost of goods sold, including 1099 contractor payments. And I can see every single week when I do my 15-minute profit allocation week, what my gross profit percentage is. And if that number dips below 70, if it happens one week, not that big of a deal. I just keep it in mind. And I also think through, is this explainable? If it's explainable, then no problem. If it dips below 70%, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a row, especially if it's a month of that, then I know I have an issue. And typically I know it's a pricing issue. Like there was probably a project I didn't price correctly. Or maybe there's money I haven't collected for that particular project appropriately. And that is a key indication of whether or not I'm pricing things correctly. And that can tell me how much I'm off. So I need to get that number to 70%, and then I can dive into the numbers and figure out, okay, where am I getting it wrong? There are clearly some projects that pay more than others. And this is still the thing where I'm looking at expenses. So if that number falls below 70%, I'm still going to look at expenses. But because I do this every week, because profit is not an event, it's a habit, because I'm doing this every week and I keep those expenses pretty tucked in, that's typically not my problem. But it could be for you. I would still look there. If that number starts to drop below 70%, and look, 70% might not be that number for you. That might just be me. But I think for marketing businesses and consulting businesses, that it's a good rule of thumb. Keeping that below 30% of things that you're paying out in order to get jobs done, I think that's a good target to hit. So if you're like me and you're thinking a 30% profit margin is great, I want to just tell you a cautionary tale of a dying business that had a 30% profit margin. I don't think that's doable to continue to exist, thrive, and grow, especially if your business gets cyclical like sometimes ours does. So I don't think 30% is the gross profit margin you're looking for. 70% might not be the right number. Maybe it's 80%. Maybe it's 60%. So I would work with a Profit First professional to figure out what that should be for you. But I do think that 70% is a good number to aim for. That means only 30% of the money is going out the door. And we're talking about on your total revenue line, that 30% of that number, the money that's coming into your door, 30% can go out to things like contractors, software for particular projects, or any other cost of goods sold that maybe I'm not thinking about, but it's a thing you need to buy in order for a particular project to be delivered. And in marketing, that can typically look like things like plugins, copywriters for particular projects, and I would keep 70% of that money. So when you're pricing your projects, you can know I've got to keep 70% of this in-house. And if I have to pay this out to get this delivered, then that's more than 30% of the fee that I'm charging the client. That means I need to charge the client more. And that's been a huge lifesaver for us to figure out, okay, how are we pricing this correctly, and what should that number be? So when we're looking at reports, that's a clear indicator of up or down. And next week, what I want to talk to you, so we're kind of talking about a target for profit margin here being around 70-75% for gross profit margin. And I kind of explained what that looks like, what numbers need to come out before you can calculate what that is. Next week, what we can talk about is using margin to mark up your prices. So when you do have to pay someone, a contractor, for a particular product, what I was getting wrong so much, I was doing a 30% markup, and what I needed was a 45% profit margin on the price. So next week, I will talk to you a little bit about how I started making those calculations and what I accidentally was leaving out. Whenever I was making those calculations, I was leaving out a lot of numbers. And so that was way reducing the ability for me to keep my gross profit margin at 70% or higher. So we've talked about a lot of numbers. Here's what I want you to remember for right now. You need to track your gross profit margin. It will be a huge indicator as to whether or not you are pricing your products correctly. If that margin drops below 70-75%, if you're paying out more than 25 to 30% of your revenue that comes in the door to contractors or cost of goods sold for a particular project, then I think it's not a healthy, thriving, growing business in a marketing and consulting business. And I think that means that you probably have a pricing problem. So always look at expenses. That's always a good thing to do. But if you're paying out more than 30% of your revenue to contractors and cost of goods sold, I don't think your profit margin is very healthy. And I think that that's a clear indication that you've got a pricing problem. And we'll talk a little bit more next week about how to right that ship and get those numbers right before you quote to the client, before you send a quote to the client. So, a lot of information. Your gross profit margin can tell you if you're thriving or maybe if you're not doing so well. I think it should be 70% or higher for you to have a sexy, sexy profit margin. And there is a way to start pricing with profit margin in mind before you send out the quote. We'll talk about that next week. Hopefully this helps. You've got your numbers in your business are trying to tell you a story. You've got some clear indicators about whether or not you're pricing things correctly. I think gross profit margin is the first place to look every single week to make sure you're on track. And if you start to see a trend where that's dropping below 70%, you've probably got a pricing problem. All right, talk to you next week. Bye.